This encounter happened when I was about 7 years old. My sister and I, we had invited our neighbour who was around our age to come over for a movie night. The neighbourhood is pretty old, so the houses aren't far apart or super close together like most neighbours are these days. It's also a very hilly neighbourhood with tons of trees everywhere. Her house was beside my driveway, less than a 2-minute walk to her front door. Anyway, after about 2 hours of pizza, Scooby-Doo and girl talk, it was about 11 o'clock, so we decided to walk her home. As we started walking towards her house, we noticed a black truck parked at the end of the yard up by the road. Nothing too odd because people park like that all the time here. Right as we all stepped off my driveway though and into her yard, a huge hooded figure stepped out from behind one of the far trees in her yard. We froze, not sure if we were seeing things or if it was actually a real person. After about 30 seconds, we started backing up, trying not to lose eye contact with the figure. And that's when he started walking slowly, getting faster with every step. By the time that we hit my driveway, he was stepping onto hers and we booked it, sprinting for the door. He also started running at this point, and all of us screamed and ran into my garage and locked the wooden door behind us. Our screams were so loud that my mother and grandmother heard us and met us at the door. At this point, all three of us were freaking the hell out, trying to explain to my mum and my grandma what happened. We told them that a man had chased us, and my mum called my friend's house to see if they saw anything outside. My friend's grandma said that they didn't see a truck or a man. My mum ended up walking with us this time since we were all too scared to walk alone. When we got to my friend's house, my friend's grandma told us that what we had seen was the pizza man. Even in my 7-year-old mind, I knew that that was a lie because what pizza man hides in a tree? Also, the only other car was the truck, which didn't have a pizza place logo anywhere. About 2 years later, we found out who the hooded man was. It ended up being my friend's 45-year-old uncle, who allegedly was a known meth addict. Apparently, he was super out of it that night, and according to her grandma, he just wanted to play a prank on us, but I really don't believe that. I honestly think that there was something more sinister at play that night. I grew up in Long Beach, California from the ages of 2 to 11. There were a lot of us living near each other, and I had 2 older sisters, and my next door neighbors were my cousins, 5 of them, and we'll be focusing on the oldest of those cousins. His name was Christian, and he was one of the most sadistic people that I had ever met. He enjoyed wrecking my Lego towers, giving me wedgies until I bled, putting a pillow on my face and sitting on it. He even used my head like a step stool once. I was too young to just properly defend myself. I had a stuffed animal at the time, a Dalmatian that I had named Dale, and Christian took Dale and put him in the oven and duct taped me to a chair with the oven light on in front of me so I could do nothing but watch as Dale, my best friend, just burned alive, at least in my child mind. And needless to say, Christian was just one fucked up individual. But I knew something was wrong when I saw him with our cat, Precious. He would use Precious's tail as a handle and swing her around, sometimes throwing her at the couch, but sometimes throwing her at the wall too. He laughed especially hard when he heard the sharp little thud. And unfortunately, she died. My parents told me that she ran away, but I knew that they were lying. It didn't occur to me until years later, but eventually I understood the truth. One night, my sisters had all their cousins over and they wanted to play with a Ouija board. I was a little frightened, so I stepped out into our backyard, away from the Ouija board, and Christian followed me outside and walked up behind me. And he pressed a knife to my throat, a serrated one from the kitchen. He was whispering things like, "What would you do if I killed you? I'm going to cut your neck and bleed you out. Why are you crying?" By this time, I was obviously hysterical. I was a 9-year-old boy sobbing and pleading for life before my sister came out and asked why I was crying so loud. Christian put the knife down so she couldn't see it, and I remember running to her and clenching to her like she was my savior. And for all I know, she may really have been. A Christian tried to lie, telling her that I was being a baby about the Ouija board, but I was so terrified and hysterical that I screamed that he was lying. I told her that he put a knife to my neck, and she held me and took me inside, calling my parents. When they came home, everything was away and everyone was gone except my sisters and me, and I was still coming down from the terror. A Christian was ordered by my Uncle Gene to never come near me again, and it worked. They moved a few months later, and in that time, I only saw Christian at family outings, and he would never talk to me. I was always kept within arm's length of anyone who was safe when he was around too. My dad brought me to the bathroom, and my mum's left hand was devoted to holding my right. He just never got the opportunity to catch me alone again. Now that we're all adults and we all have a social media account, Christian tries to add me on Facebook and my other social media outlets, but I block him. And a few months later, another of his accounts will try to add me. For what it's worth, I really hope that I never see him again at another family gathering, which is not likely since he was disowned by Uncle Gene a few years later. I don't know what he did to piss off my uncle so bad, because my uncle is actually a really good guy, but I can only imagine that it was not good. So I grew up in a small town in New Zealand and had recently moved to a big city for university. The town I grew up in was a really rough and a gang-orientated place, so I was always somewhat weary of strangers. Living in a big city was awesome because I got to go shopping in malls and Kmart, and Kmart in New Zealand is probably the equivalent of Walmart in the US, but us Kiwis seem to just love it a lot. Anyway, one day I was shopping at Kmart, just looking at the dog beds, which were at the back aisle of the store. Kmart is huge here, and the back aisle is the entire length of the store, in fact. And I get this feeling that I'm being watched and see an old man in a mobility scooter at the opposite end just staring at me. I gave him a smile and turned back to browsing when, in my peripheral, I see him racing towards me in this scooter at a great high speed. I immediately assumed that his urgency must mean that he needs some help reaching or finding something, so I turned to face him. He was just a harmless old man, right? Wrong. He quickly starts chatting with me and sharing personal things with me without actually greeting me. He starts telling me how I look like his wife, who passed when she was younger. Then he starts telling me how lonely he is, so I start to feel a lot of pity for him. And then the conversation starts taking a weird turn. He starts telling me how he likes to dress up and feel sexy in women's clothing. Then he starts to open his mouth and show me his missing teeth and gums. The sudden turn of conversation startles me, and I start to realize that I need to end this and leave him immediately. After several attempts at saying goodbye, he finally agrees to let me go and holds out his hand for a goodbye handshake. Desperate to leave, I agree to shake his hand in order for him to just leave me alone. But suddenly, his grip tightens and I can't pull my hand away. He forces my hand towards his mouth and begins to make out with the back of it, while swishing his tongue across it in circles. I aggressively pull my hand away and sprint out of the store in shock. The air from running makes the back of my hand feel cold and slimy, so I run to the mall toilets and scrub my hand for a solid 10 minutes, vowing to never let him talk to me again. And so, I thought that I'd never see him again until, just recently, I did. I was on the bus to uni when he gets on without his mobility scooter and a walking stick instead. Thankfully, I had someone already sitting next to me, so I felt safe. However, his eyes scanned the bus, and when they met mine, he immediately smirked. So, when the bus got to the interchange, where everyone gets off and gets onto other buses, I quickly rushed off the bus so I wouldn't have to see him. I felt my stomach hit the floor when I hear him calling after me. I glance over my shoulder to see him waving his walking stick, yelling and pursuing after me. I quickly rush out into a shopping store to lose him, which is thankfully a success. The rest of the day goes fine until I go to return home and see that he is waiting at the stop that I board my bus at. I hide until I can see my bus coming, and he's looking around and starts to wander away from the bus stop, which is my cue to quickly board. I jump in line and quickly board. However, he has spotted me and is waving his stick and yelling after me again. I start to panic as I don't want to be trapped in a bus with him, and he is just about to step on the bus when the driver all of a sudden just slams the doors on him. This makes him furious, and he starts smashing his walking stick against the window and shouting, and I look at the driver, who just smiles at me and gives me a nod and starts to pull away onto the road. Honestly, I'm totally overjoyed that this kind driver has literally just saved me from this creepy old man. So I step up to the window that he's hitting and stare directly at him with the filthiest look that I can give while the bus is slowly driving away. I literally felt like I got some power back at that moment, and I later found out that this old man is a well-known creep in the community, which makes me so grateful that the bus driver saved me that day. It was the first Tuesday of the Pennsylvania deer rifle season, December 3rd of 2013. I've always been an avid hunter, and I would wake up early in the morning to get into the woods before daylight. I would be in the woods at 4:30 in the morning, in fact. Having to hunt on state game lands meant beating other people into the woods to get a decent spot. When I got to the parking area around 4:15 a.m., no one was there. So I walked into the woods, not using a flashlight, only walking by moonlight, and I walked through a field into the tree line and started on the path to my spot. I came to the intersection in the path, and one way went left and down the mountain, and the other way went right. I went right because my spot was on the other side, and roughly 50 yards after making the right-hand turn, I smelled what I can only describe as hot garbage. I mean, it hit me in the face. Hot dumpster juice in the middle of August. So I stopped dead, turned on my flashlight expecting to see piles of garbage, but there was nothing. No garbage, nothing dead, just that hot garbage smell. But keep in mind, this is in December and it's cold out. High 20s, low 30s, so even if there was garbage, it wouldn't smell that bad. So I kind of thought nothing of it, and I followed the path to my spot, which was down over the ridge from the garbage smell. Roughly maybe 40 feet down, that leads into a grass field where I would sit. I set up my seat and get settled in for about 2 minutes. And that's when the rocks started coming down the ridge. The first rock startled me, causing me to turn on my light again, scanning the field hoping to see eye reflections of deer, but nothing was there again. I sat back down and another rock comes down the ridge. This time, I stand up and go out into the grass field with flashlight and the pistol that I carry while hunting. Scanned again and there was nothing. I purposely waited in the field for about 5 minutes too, but there was nothing. At this point, I'm getting angry, assuming that another hunter is messing with me because I'm in their spot. I sit down again and the third rock, sounding larger than the others, comes tumbling down the ridge. I don't get up this time though, and not 2 minutes after that, another rock, not tumbled, but sounded as though it was thrown off the ridge and landed into the field. And now, I'm pissed. I gather up my gear and started back up the trail to the ridge, and I get to the top of the ridge and scan with my light on the whole time, and there's no eyes and no other hunter. There's literally nothing up here. I get to the spot where I smelled the hot garbage, and this time, the smell is gone. And then, finally, it clicked in my head. It may not have been another person, but possibly something else. I've heard other people's stories of Bigfoot experiences, and a lot of which remark about how bad they smell. So at this point, I say screw this, and I all but run out of the woods, and to top it all off, there's no other vehicles in the parking area when I get out of the woods. I guess the creepiest thing about this whole experience, though, is that I later come to find out that a co-worker of mine had actually seen a bipedal cross in front of his car within 2 miles of the location of my experience. So, maybe, just maybe, they're real. I don't know, but I definitely had an experience that I'll never forget. So this happened at a car shop that I work at a few months ago. For some context, I'm a 16-year-old dude and I do the dirty work. Change oil, clean tools, all that stuff, so I usually work on the far side of the shop on the bay closest to the bathroom. Anyways, in the shop that day was me, Wayne, and Mike. The other guy, his name was Josh, and he called in sick that day. So the morning shift goes by normally, and we finish up our work and we get ready to go out for lunch. We were about to leave when a friend of my boss walks in and wanted to chat with Mike and Wayne. Well, while they're chatting, I decided to just go and wash my hands. The bathroom is on the complete other side of the shop, so I'm kind of secluded over there, and when I'm washing my hands, I hear someone walking up behind me. Since we're pretty good friends at the shop, I thought it was Wayne trying to prank me, so I said suck me, but I didn't get a response. At this point, I was actually scared that it was a customer, but I turned around and I see Josh just standing there. He looks pale as anything and bloodshot and wide-eyed, and I remember being really confused at this point. He doesn't really do anything for a good 10 seconds, and I'm getting kind of creeped out at this point. And then he says, "Do you have $60? I gotta buy something." I sort of stuttered that I didn't. I did. I had like $250 on me, but I said that he should ask Wayne or Mike. He kind of walked closer to me and said, "Nah, man, they already said no," and put his hand on my wrist. I'd like to say that that's when I called for help or something, but I just kind of stood there, frozen. I had no idea if he was going to mug me or kidnap me or what, but I just kind of stood there being a little bitch. That's when I guessed that he heard Mike and Wayne coming back, so he just bolted out of the shop. When they saw me, they asked who the hell I was talking to and then heard Josh speeding away. So I told them what happened and they called the boss and told him what Josh had done. My boss ended up calling Josh, but there was no answer obviously, and just left a message telling him that he was fired and to never come back to the shop again. After that whole ordeal, I left the shop to eat lunch at my house and I got a call from an unknown number. Of course, it was Josh and he asked me for more money. When I said no, he started yelling about how this was my fault and he just hung up on me. After this, I only worked next to Mike and Wayne, being too scared to work on the other side of the shop alone anymore. So, the rest of the week goes by no problem. A little spooked, but there's no other issues. Then my boss gets back and does this weekly check and sees that we're missing $60 from the register and the revolver too. The gun was missing. We already know who did it, so we called the cops on Josh and we gave them the VIN of the gun and told them everything they needed to know, and after about a week, which I skipped because I was scared that he would shoot us or something, the police told us that he pawned the gun down the street and was caught with heroin. After all of that, I kind of finally felt safe. A few weeks go by and all is well, and I felt safe again, so I started working in my bay on the other side of the shop again. It was getting warm, so we started leaving the hangar bays open while we worked. Bad idea. While I was changing the oil in a car, other side of the shop and alone, a shirtless dude just walks into the bay under my car. I shit you not, this guy had swastikas on his chest and profane symbols just all over his face. He was covered in tats. Looking back, he was definitely some sort of neo-Nazi or something. Being a bi-Asian myself, I was terrified that I was going to be a victim of a fucking hate crime or something. So I grabbed my ratchet thinking that I would swing or something, and instead, I just kind of stood there until he walked up really close, looked me over and asked where Josh was. Nervously, I told him that he was fired and asked what he needed. He rambled on about how he owed him $2,000 and how he said that we had it for about 2 minutes. Then he asked if I had any money, and luckily, that's when Wayne walked in and told him to piss off. He knocked over some tools and sped off in his car, and later that day, around closing time, I got a call from Josh, and I just handed it off to Wayne this time. I don't really know what was said to Josh, but I know that Wayne threatened him enough that we've not had any strange visitors since then. After that incident, though all is well now apart from the occasional call from Josh asking for money, we lock up the gun and change the register password now. Josh was replaced with Chris, and I only work next to Michael Wayne because I'm anxious as hell now. Whenever I wash my hands, though, I often wonder what Josh's intentions were. It makes me sick to think of what could have happened if my co-workers weren't watching out for me. To this day, I don't know who that neo-Nazi guy was and if he was sent by Josh or if he really was just looking for money. Perhaps he was some sort of hitman or sent there to intimidate me or something. I have no idea, but man, am I glad that this is all over. I'm a 35-year-old female, and my story takes place when I was 15, but man, it feels like yesterday. I'm from a little village in Ireland with a population of a few hundred. The nearest town is about 10 miles away. Growing up in rural Ireland was very idealistic. The summers were spent playing football with the neighbours or going to the lake swimming till the sun went down, and I was lucky that, even though the population is small and the houses are far apart, my best friend's house was only down the road, so during those summer months, Mary and I were inseparable. My friend and I grew up with lots of brothers and sisters in a safe village, and we were given a lot of freedom, and sometimes we were gone all day and only came back before dark. As it was in the mid-90s, we had no mobiles, but our mums knew that we would be okay and look out for each other. One thing we did like doing during these summers, besides going to the lake and hanging out at each other's houses, was to go down to town and look around the shops. The easiest way to get to town was to hitchhike, as there were no buses there. Here in Ireland, we call it thumbing, but hardly anyone hitches now because most households have 2 cars and parents are a lot more protective these days. But back in the 80s and 90s, it was pretty common. Our parents were okay with it, but there were certain rules that we had to follow. I'm not entirely sure who came up with the rules, but I assume our parents did. The first rule was that we never hitch alone. You must thumb with at least 1 or 2 friends. The second rule was never take a lift if there are 2 or more men in the car, but 2 or more women was fine. The third, never take a lift from someone in a van. There could be more guys hiding in the back, or worse, ropes and blindfolds, etc. And the fourth rule was the most important rule. When a car stops to pick you up, always ask the driver where they're going first. If you tell them where you're going first, they could pretend that they're going to the same place to lure you in. Now, I'll admit that we were innocent, but we did have some common sense, so we followed the rules down to a T. At least, we tried to anyway. My friend Mary and I used to hitch once a week during the summer, and we would go down to town with a population of a few thousand and just look around the shops and eat ice cream and hang out and stuff. When we did get a ride, we had to make small talk with the driver, and as 2 shy 15-year-olds, this bit really sucked the most. To make it fair, we took turns sitting in the front, and the one in the front did most of the talking. But one day, we spent a few hours in town, and it was pretty uneventful, so we decided to thumb back. At around 3 p.m, we went to the usual spot to hitch from, just on the outskirts of the town, and we were only waiting for about 5 minutes when a white car pulled up. Before we could ask where he was going, he asked us first, and my friend told him, and he said that he was passing through our village on the way to another one. Rule number 4, it was broken, but he seemed nice enough, and we just wanted to go home at this point. And it was my turn to sit in the front. The driver introduced himself as John, a farmer, and he was super friendly. He was dressed in a worn t-shirt with holes in it, and he had tattered pants and smelled of cow crap. The car was full of bits of straw and was old and battered like the driver. He was about 60, I think. Had no wedding band on, and don't ask me why, but I always notice these things. About halfway between town and our home village, he asked if we heard a noise, and we replied with no. He said that there it is again, and it sounds like a banging noise. I didn't hear anything, so I just sat there quietly, and then he said, I think it might be the exhaust pipe. He pulled up on a busy road and went out to take a look. Mary said, I didn't hear anything, and he seems like a weirdo, I said. Call it intuition, but even though he was super friendly and chatty, I just got a bad vibe from him. The next thing, he comes back to the driver's side and tells us that the exhaust is hanging down and was hitting off the road. He needs us to help him tie it up, and it was then that I noticed that he had string holding up his pants instead of a belt. And I thought that this was really odd. Anyway, he got some string off the boot, same colored string as his belt, and we both got out of the car. Although I got a bad vibe from him, I didn't feel scared at this stage, and we were on a busy road, and it was only about 3:30 p.m., so we both got out of the car. He showed us the exhaust pipe hanging down and used an old rag to hold it up because it was hot. My friend Mary took over holding it up while he secured it with a string, and they were both kneeling while I just stood back and watched. And it was then that I noticed that his fly was open, and I could see all of his junk, and he was clearly not wearing any underwear. He didn't even have a belt on, so I guess I wasn't too surprised. In my head I thought, oh shit, what's going on? But I didn't say anything. I just kind of stood there in shock. Mary hadn't noticed at this stage and just continued to hold the pipe, and when John was standing up, he noticed his fly was open too and acted all shocked. He said, "Oh girls, I'm so sorry and embarrassed. I only have a safety pin holding the fly together and it must have come off. Please forgive me and get back into the car." Mary was stunned because she got a real close-up of everything, which left me to do all the talking. I told him that it was okay and that it was just an accident, so we got back into the car. He fastened the safety pin, even though I didn't see him look for it, and all was hidden again. Back in the car, the atmosphere was now very different. We both felt mortified, and he kept apologizing over and over again, and I just looked out the passenger window and repeated that it was okay. And then he said something that really turned my stomach. He said, "Well, girls, you're taking it really well, and if I didn't know any better, I'd swear you liked it." And then he nudged me in the arm with his arm, like you would do to a friend. I looked at him through the corner of my eye, my face still facing the window, when I noticed that his fly was undone again, and he was exposed all over again. He must have noticed me looking because he said, "Oh, sorry, the safety pin keeps opening. Just don't look." Fine by me, I thought. But I said okay and just continued to look out the window. But he kept nudging me and saying, "Don't be looking," and giggling at the same time. He was doing this in a really creepy and weird playful way, like the whole thing was a joke or something. Mary started giggling too because when she's nervous, she laughs like that. I knew it wasn't her fault, but I was getting angry at this stage, and he wouldn't stop telling me to stop looking. And then he said, "Your friend is laughing. She must be enjoying the view." This made her laugh even harder, and now, remember, we're both polite 15-year-old kids that always respect our elders and are a little shy, so I would never speak up to an adult. The nudging in my arm and my friend laughing was all getting too much for me, though, and he asked was it the first Willie I'd ever seen, and told me once again to stop looking. I was turned facing the passenger window so much that I had my back to him, and there is no way that I could be looking, and I just lost my temper at this stage. I shouted at the top of my voice that I'm not looking, and told Mary to shut the hell up, and silence followed. He said sorry and that he was only joking and I didn't need to be so serious, and I said nothing and just sat there, red with temper. I should have told him to just let us out. I should have told him to cover himself up, the dirty old perv, but I was kind of in shock too, and a part of me wanted to believe that it was all just an innocent mistake. Anyway, we finally arrived at our tiny, safe little village, and we got out, and he said again that he was sorry about the whole thing. And my friend got her voice back and assured him that it was okay, and I said it was all okay too, and not to worry about it. I said thanks for the lift, and what he said back to me sickened me. He looked me up and down with this creepy smile and said, "Girlies, thanks for everything." And he just drove off. We were left speechless, and we sat down on a nearby bench to just process all of this before just heading home. We made a deal that we wouldn't tell our parents, or they'd never let us hitchhike again. My friend got back her voice and repeated, "Pervert, sicko, smelly bastard," and he had planned this thing the whole time, over and over. About 5 minutes after sitting down on the bench, guess who drives by, going the direction that we had just come from? Old pervert Farmer John, waving and smiling while we just sat there stunned. He had beeped to catch our attention too, and so much for passing through our village, hey? A few months later, and the ordeal went to the back of my mind. Occasionally we would talk about Farmer John, but we made jokes about it, and we told some of our friends about what had happened. But one day, I told a friend of mine, Brid, and a cousin of hers had told her a very similar story. The cousin lived in another village about 20 miles the other direction from our town. She was a few years older than us too, and while hitchhiking home one day, the same thing happened to her and her friend. The exhaust, the safety pin, and the undone fly, and it was no accident, and my worst fears, they were confirmed. Farmer John, he really was a pervert, which means that we probably got pretty lucky that day when nothing else happened.